On April 4th, 1968, the world would change forever when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was taken from us by a cruel act of violence. He was a man who dedicated his life to fighting for justice and equality, inspiring a nation, and changing the course of history. His words still echo in our hearts and minds, reminding us of the power of love and nonviolence in the face of hatred and oppression. Martin Luther King Jr. was a prominent figure in American history, known for his leadership in the civil rights movement. His nonviolent protests and speeches inspired a generation to fight for equality and justice. However, he was assassinated, leaving a nation in mourning and sparking questions about the reasons for his death. Why was he killed? Was the government involved in his assassination? Did he have enemies? These are questions many are still asking 55 years later. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. was a result of numerous factors, including racism, political motives, and personal grievances. In this video, we will explore important highlights in the life of Martin Luther King Jr., the factors that contributed to his untimely death, and we'll uncover the truth behind one of the most tragic events in American history.
Perhaps the most notable figure of the modern civil rights movement is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King has become a symbol of peace, courage, sacrifice, and impeccable leadership.
The civil rights leader had spurred landmark victories against segregation and racial discrimination in the United States.
Through his work, King helped pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and received the Nobel Peace Prize that same year.
There was so much more for him to accomplish, but at 6:01 p.m., a snapping sound cracked loud in the Memphis sky. A bullet flew across the road, and Martin Luther King Jr. fell to the ground, bleeding from his head and neck.
Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. He was the middle child of Michael King Sr. and Alberta Williams King. King's father was a Baptist minister, and the family was deeply involved in the Baptist church and the African American community. King was heavily influenced by his father, who was a church pastor who he saw stand up against segregation every day of his life. King's father was also an activist and led a march in 1936 with several African Americans present at the time. They marched to Atlanta's City Hall to protest against the economic injustices and voting rights discrimination. Martin Luther King developed a reputation for his powerful oratory and public speaking skills as a member of his high school debate team. He developed a special style that was as beautiful as it was unique, blending his deep baritone voice with an extensive vocabulary. He graduated from high school and got into the prestigious Atlanta Morehouse College, an all-male historically black university, attended by both his father and maternal grandfather. King became a Baptist minister and was ordained in February 1948 at the age of 19. Same year, King graduated from Morehouse College with a degree in sociology and then went on to earn a PhD in theology from Boston University in 1955. While studying for his doctorate, King served as an assistant minister at Boston's 12th Baptist Church. The church was well known for its abolitionist origins. He later met and married Coretta Scott, who at the time was a student at the New England Conservatory of Music. King's experiences with segregation and racism, combined with his religious beliefs, led him to become a prominent voice in the civil rights movement. He believed in using nonviolent resistance, inspired by the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, to achieve change. After completing his doctorate, King returned to the South at the age of 25 and was ordained the pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. It was during this time that Rosa Parks made history when she refused to give up her seat for a white passenger on a Montgomery bus. The Montgomery's black community staged an extremely successful bus boycott in 1955, which lasted for almost a year. King was a key figure in the success of this protest. He came to national prominence after he was arrested and imprisoned as the boycott's leader. He became a lead figure in the civil rights movement. After his release, King met with other black church leaders in the South and founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. This group organized and engaged in nonviolent resistance against Jim Crow laws. King was greatly influenced and inspired by Mahatma Gandhi's model of nonviolent resistance and believed that peaceful protests for civil rights would lead to sympathetic media coverage and spur better public opinion. He was able to achieve this when the world watched with horror the widely televised episodes of violent attacks by white officials on civil rights activists during a peaceful march. The civil rights movement was a period of intense social and political activism in the United States, aimed at ending racial discrimination and securing equal rights for African Americans. MLK emerged as a leader of the movement, using nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience to draw attention to the injustices faced by Black Americans. His speeches, such as his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, inspired thousands to join the fight for equality.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
He organized marches, sit-ins, and boycotts to bring attention to the need for change. Despite facing opposition, including violence and arrests, MLK and the Civil Rights Movement made a significant progress in their efforts to end segregation and gain equal rights for Black Americans. The movement enjoyed some victory with the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and also the Voting Rights Act in 1965. King's leadership and activism earned him national recognition, and he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 for his efforts to end segregation and racial discrimination through nonviolent means. However, the progress made by the Civil Rights Movement also led to increased opposition. Many segregationists and those opposed to the Civil Rights Movement saw MLK and his followers as a threat to the status quo and took action to stop their progress. In 1959, King returned to Atlanta to serve as co-pastor with his father at the Ebenezer Baptist Church. He worked closely with the NAACP, and together with other leaders of the SCLC, they focused their attention on Birmingham, Alabama. In 1963, they organized sit-ins in public places, and the protests drew attention after a series of televised footage showed Birmingham police using pressurized water jets and sending police dogs after the peaceful protesters. The march was a successful one, and soon after the notorious Birmingham police chief, Bull Connor, resigned, and also the city council moved to desegregate public spaces. King was arrested and sent to jail, and it was here that he composed his legendary letter from Birmingham jail. In the letter, King passionately disagreed with white sympathizers who urged him to use legal means to advance the cause rather than through a protest. King stated that the unjust situation facing African Americans called for an urgent action. He wrote that injustice everywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, stating that experience has shown that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed.
I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly.
After his release, he worked with the NAACP together with members of the SCLC and other civil rights groups to organize the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. This march attracted about 250,000 people to rally and march for the civil and economic rights of Black Americans in the nation's capital. It was at this march that King delivered his prophetic "I Have a Dream" speech. Again, in 1965, together with other civil rights activists, he organized and participated in the Selma to Montgomery March. Once again, the brutal attacks by the police on the peaceful protesters were televised and broadcasted to the homes of Americans across the country. After the march, King gave his "How Long, Not Long" speech, in which he prophesied the eventual equality of rights for African Americans. Less than 6 months after this march, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, banning the disenfranchisement of Black Americans. Martin Luther King stood strongly against racism. He often spoke against the institutional and systemic racism prevalent in America. He mentioned that true racial equality cannot be reached without radical structural changes in American society. Joe Fegan, a distinguished professor of sociology in the University of Texas, pointed out that while King recognized structural changes as a means to attain equality, he was more keen on the need for white and Black people to agree on what equality actually means. Fegan said King noted in a speech not long before his 1968 assassination that a major problem facing the movement was getting white people to understand the meaning of the civil rights movement, because there is a clear misunderstanding of what equality means to African Americans by the whites. At the time, King pointed out that the general idea that many white people, even the well-meaning ones, think that equality means Black people have to improve. King argued that if racism was ever going to be eradicated, then white people must begin to walk in the pathways of their Black brother and feel some of the pain and hurt that throb their daily lives. And as the movement grew and King's influence increased, so did the many threats and violence against him and other civil rights activists during the 1960s was a result of several political motives. Martin Luther King Jr. was a vocal critic of the US government and its policies during the civil rights movement. He criticized the government for its lack of action on issues such as poverty, racism, and inequality, and called for significant changes to address these problems. MLK also criticized the government for its involvement in the Vietnam War, which he saw as an unjust conflict that was taking resources and attention away from the domestic issues such as poverty and inequality. His opposition to the war made him a target for those who supported the conflict and for the government, which saw his criticism as a threat to its authority. As early as the mid-1950s, King had received multiple death threats because of his prominence in the civil rights movement. He had confronted the risk of death, including a nearly fatal stabbing in 1958. He was consistently speaking about his firm belief that murder could not stop the struggle for equal rights. After the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963, King told his wife, Coretta Scott King, "This is what is going to happen to me also. I keep telling you, this is a sick society." Despite the risks, MLK continued to speak out against the government and its policies, inspiring a generation of people to join the civil rights movement and to fight for a more just and equal society. His criticism of the government was a crucial aspect of the civil rights movement and helped to bring about significant changes in the US. Unfortunately, King was fatally shot at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee on April 4, 1968 at 6:01 p.m. CST. He was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital where he died at 7:05 p.m. While the official explanation is that James Earl Ray was responsible for the killing, there have been long-standing suspicions and allegations of government involvement in the assassination. These allegations suggest that the government may have had a hand in MLK's death due to his political activism and criticism of government policies. The King family and others believe that the assassination was the result of a conspiracy involving the US government, the mafia, and Memphis police, as alleged by Lloyd Jowers in 1993. They believe that Ray was a scapegoat. In 1999, the family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Jowers for the sum of $10 million. However, during closing arguments, their attorney asked the jury to award damages of $100 to make the point that it was not about the money. During the trial, both sides presented evidence alleging a government conspiracy. The accused government agencies could not defend themselves or respond because they were not named as defendants. Based on the evidence, the jury concluded that Jowers and others were part of a conspiracy to kill King and awarded the family $100. James Earl Ray's motives for killing Martin Luther King Jr. are unclear and remain a subject of debate till date. At the time of his arrest, Ray claimed that he had not intended to kill MLK, but that the shooting was a result of the chance encounter. He later recanted this statement and claimed to have been part of a larger conspiracy, but these claims were never sustained. Some theories suggest that Ray was motivated by racism and a desire to undermine the civil rights movement. Others have suggested that he was influenced by anti-government and anti-Semitic beliefs. However, there is no clear evidence to support these theories, and the true motive behind the killings remains unknown. While the question of government involvement in MLK's death remains unresolved, it is clear that personal grievances, such as those held by James Earl Ray, also played a role in the violence and threats against MLK and other civil rights activists during the 1960s. Regardless of the motive, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. was a tragic event that had a profound impact on the civil rights movement and on American society as a whole. MLK's death remains a powerful reminder of the risks and sacrifices that activists took in the fight for equality and justice. MLK's opposition to the Vietnam War and criticism of the US government obviously made him a target for those who opposed his views. You would wonder whether that is enough reason to take him out of the way. Additionally, James Earl Ray's history of criminal activity and unclear motives for the killing added to the complex and tragic circumstances surrounding MLK's death. Was he sent, or did he act based on his own volition? Despite the violence and threats that he faced, including his unjust assassination, Martin Luther King Jr. remains an inspiring figure and a symbol of the civil rights movement. His advocacy for equality and justice and his unwavering commitment to nonviolent resistance continue to inspire people around the world. The civil rights movement, of which MLK was a key leader, brought about significant changes in the US, including the end of segregation and the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. These changes paved the way for a more just and equal society, but there is still work to be done to fully realize MLK's vision of a society free from racism and inequality. The legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement serves as a call to action for all of us to continue their work in promoting equality and justice.